You know what's wild, man? Sometimes you come across people who just don't fit the era they're born in. Like, they're too bold, too real, too connected to something way deeper than what the world around them can even process. Mother Angelica was one of those people. This woman wasn't just another religious figure. She was a force of nature, a nun in the heart of modern America who somehow built one of the biggest religious media networks on the planet. EWTN, literally from a garage. I mean, how crazy is that? Nun, not a billionaire, not a media mogul, not some Hollywood producer. A woman of faith who just refused to quit. So and what really gets me is that she didn't have a big business plan or some team of consultants mapping out market strategies. No, she had faith. Like real faith, the kind that moves people, the kind that gets you up every morning when logic says, this is impossible. She believed that if God wanted it, he'd make it happen. And somehow he did. Do not imagine this. It's the late 1970s, early 80s, no internet, no YouTube, no social media. Just television controlled by massive corporations, pushing whatever they thought people should see. And then here comes this nun, wearing her habit with a thick Alabama accent, saying, we're going to start a TV network for God. That's not just bold, that's insane. But she did it. She literally built cameras, borrowed gear, trained people, learned broadcasting from scratch. Dude, she hustled harder than most influencers today. And what made her even more fascinating was her attitude. She wasn't that soft-spoken, distant kind of nun people imagine. She was fiery, straight up fearless. She'd go on air and say stuff that made both atheists and religious people uncomfortable. But that's what truth does, right? It shakes people. It forces you to think. Mother Angelica didn't care about being politically correct. She cared about being spiritually correct. And man, in a time when everything was about image and profit, she stood there on Lev TV talking about God, about discipline, about sin, about redemption. Topics most networks wouldn't touch because they didn't sell ads, and yet people tuned in millions across continents. Because deep down, even in a modern, skeptical world, people still crave something real, something honest, something eternal. What's even crazier is how much resistance she faced. You got to picture it? A nun trying to build a satellite TV station. She was laughed at. People in the church doubted her. Big donors ignored her. Media execs thought she'd last a few months and burn out. But every time someone said no, she just doubled down. That's the warrior spirit. That's what I respect. You could see in her eyes that she wasn't doing this for fame or followers. She was on a mission. There's something about that kind of conviction that just hits you. Because in today's world, man, most people won't even post their opinion online unless they're sure it'll get likes. And here's this nun standing up to TV networks, bishops, even politicians, because she refused to water down the message. She didn't bend for trends. She didn't change her tone to fit the culture. She said, this is truth. Take it or leave it. That's courage. When you listen to her old interviews or watch those classic EWTN shows, you feel that old school strength, that raw mix of humor, wisdom, and absolute faith. She wasn't preaching like a celebrity. She was talking like a mother who just wants her kids to wake up and realize how lost the world's become. And that's what made her legacy so heavy, man. She wasn't just teaching people about religion. She was reminding them of something bigger than politics, bigger than fame, bigger than comfort. She was saying, look, your soul matters. Your choices matter. God's not some distant idea. He's real, and he's watching how you live. It's powerful. Because when you strip away all the noise, all the fake inspiration quotes, all the be your best self nonsense, you realize she was giving people something solid to hold on to. In a time when everything's designed to distract you, she was pointing people back to the source. And I think that's why, decades later, people are still talking about her. Even folks who aren't Catholic. They look at what she did and go, damn, that's respect. Because you don't have to share her beliefs to appreciate her grind.
The authenticity.
The backbone, the refusal to play by the world's script. When she passed, man, it wasn't just the death of a religious figure. It was the end of an era. The kind of era where faith actually had guts. Where people didn't just talk about God when it was convenient, they lived it every day, every breath. You ever notice how some people are just anchored? Like no matter what's happening in the world, chaos, scandals, politics, whatever, they just don't move from their foundation. That was Mother Angelica. This woman was planted so deep in her faith that nothing could shake her. It's almost like she lived in a different frequency, like she could see what the rest of us were too distracted to notice. Teta, she wasn't born into power or privilege. She came from pain, real pain. Her childhood was rough, her family struggled, her father left, and her mom barely held things together. Most people who grow up like that either collapse or turn cynical, but not her. She found strength in surrendering not to the world, but to something higher. To God, and that's what set her apart. She didn't build EWTN out of ambition. She built it out of obedience. That's heavy, man. Imagine having a dream so wild, and the only reason you pursue it is because you feel called to. Teta and her connection to Catholicism wasn't some blind ritual thing. She wasn't just repeating prayers like a robot or following dogma for the sake of it. She lived it. Every single part of it. You could tell that for her. Faith wasn't a religion. It was a relationship. She had this raw honesty when she talked about God, like she was talking about someone she knew personally. And that energy, man, you can't fake that. People felt it. Teta, when you watch her clips, it's not fancy production or emotional manipulation. It's just her sitting there, talking straight into the camera, no filter, no script, saying stuff like, you can't be half in and half out with God. Either you're in or you're not. And it's so refreshing because in today's world, everyone's afraid to draw lines. Everyone wants to live in the gray. But she didn't do great. She was black and white, truth and lie, right and wrong. And here's what's crazy. She wasn't some uptight rule keeper either. She was funny as hell, sharp, sarcastic. You could tell she loved life. She loved people. She loved to laugh. But she never let the humor distract from the truth. It's like she knew the balance, how to reach your heart without sugarcoating what you needed to hear. And that's where you start to realize what deeply rooted in Catholicism actually meant for her. It wasn't about wearing a habit or following rituals just because tradition said so. It was about embodying the essence of faith. Humility, devotion, compassion, and courage. The kind of faith that doesn't break when life hits hard. She understood that religion wasn't supposed to make life easier. It was supposed to make life meaningful. There's a difference, man. People chase comfort. She chased truth. That's a whole different league. Teta, think about it. She's running a global TV network, facing financial struggles, health problems, public criticism, and still finds time to pray, fast, forgive, and guide others. That's not normal strength. That's supernatural strength. That's someone who's not operating on willpower. That's someone fueled by purpose. Teta, and she wasn't afraid to call out her own church when it drifted off course. That takes guts. Imagine loving something so much that you're willing to stand up to its flaws to protect its soul. That's loyalty. That's real love. So what really gets me, though, is how she carried that faith into everything she did, how she dealt with people, how she talked about suffering, how she handled fame. There was never that ego vibe. She'd say things like, God doesn't need your success. He needs your faithfulness. And that line right there, man, that's wisdom. Because we live in a world obsessed with metrics, followers, views, achievements. And here's this nun saying, none of that matters if you lose your soul. Ta-ta. And that's why she still resonates today. Because people are spiritually starving, even if they don't realize it. Everyone's scrolling for meaning. Everyone's chasing dopamine. And she was out there decades ago saying, you're not going to find peace in the algorithm. You'll find it in prayer, in discipline, in surrender. Ta-da. It's funny. She wasn't trying to be a philosopher or an influencer, but she ended up becoming one of the most influential spiritual voices of modern times. Why? Because truth cuts through time. It doesn't expire. You could play one of her talks right now, and it would feel like she's talking about 2025. The same confusion, the same chaos, the same search for something real. Teo, and that's what being deeply rooted looks like. You can't fake it. You can't buy it. You can't brand it. You either live it or you don't. Mother Angelica lived it every single day until her last breath. You ever think about how some people do stuff that just shouldn't be possible? Like, if you wrote it in a script, people would be like, nah, that's too far-fetched. That's what Mother Angelica did when she built EWTN. This wasn't some corporate-backed million-dollar project. This was a nun with a dream, a handful of volunteers, and the kind of courage you only get when you believe something way bigger than yourself is running the show. To picture this, it's the late 70s, right? Cable TV is just starting to take off. You've got all these networks popping up, sports, music, news, and in the middle of that chaos, this nun says, we're going to build a Catholic TV network. People thought she was insane. I mean, who would even watch that? Who would fund it? How do you compete with Hollywood? Shut up, but that's the thing. She didn't care about competing. She wasn't trying to beat anyone. She just wanted to get the truth out. She once said something like, if you want to do the Lord's work, you do it, and he'll handle the rest. That's such a gangster statement if you think about it. Like she's saying, I don't need your permission. I've got a mission. Chatan, bro. She literally started this thing in a garage. Not a fancy studio, a garage. She got people from the local community, taught them how to use cameras, learned broadcasting herself, built her own set pieces, and slowly, piece by piece, the dream took shape. You can still see old footage of those early shows. No fancy lighting, no high production, just raw passion. And yet, there's something magnetic about it. You can feel the authenticity through the screen. Tada, what blows my mind is how much she risked. She wasn't playing it safe. At one point, she took loans, faced pressure from inside and outside the church, dealt with critics who said a nun had no business running a media network. And you know what she said? She said, if we're going to fail doing God's will. Like, boom. Mic drop. That's the mindset of someone who doesn't care about losing as long as she's standing for the truth. Tada, you've got to understand, this woman had no media experience, no blueprint, no connections. And yet, she outworked and outbelieved entire corporations. That's what faith looks like when it's put into motion. It's not just sitting around hoping things will happen. It's stepping into the unknown and saying, let's go. And she didn't just make EWTN a local thing, it went global. Within a few years, her message was reaching millions across continents. People from Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Europe, they were watching this nun talk about God in the middle of the night on their TVs. It's unreal. The ripple effect was massive. But here's what separates her from most entrepreneurs or founders. She wasn't chasing numbers. She didn't care if she had 5 viewers or 5 million. She cared about impact. She used to say that if one soul came closer to God through her work, it was worth everything. That's crazy humility in a world obsessed with metrics. And she ran EWTN like a commander, but also like a mother. She wasn't soft. If you were lazy or dishonest, she'd call you out. Straight up. But she also had this warmth, this humor that made you want to follow her. People didn't just work for her, they believed with her. That's why it worked. At one point, she even had a stroke, lost her ability to speak clearly, but refused to quit. She'd sit there frail and half paralyzed, still smiling, still radiating faith. That's when you realize this isn't just a network story. It's a human story. It's about what happens when someone refuses to let fear dictate their destiny. And honestly, man, in today's world where everything's digital and fast and disposable, her story hits even harder because it reminds you that real impact doesn't come from algorithms, it comes from conviction. You can't fake that. You can't automate that. You look at EWTN today, it's huge, global, multi-language, still running strong. And it all started with one nun who refused to say, I can't. That's the kind of energy the world's missing right now. Everyone wants to play it safe, protect their comfort zone, wait for perfect conditions. Mother Angelica, she jumped first and figured it out on the way down. And that's what made her legendary. She didn't wait for approval, she acted. She didn't wait for money, she moved. She didn't wait for miracles, she became one. What's fascinating about Mother Angelica, and honestly kind of beautiful, is that she didn't just talk to religious people. She connected with everybody. Like, even if you weren't Catholic, even if you didn't believe in God at all, something about the way she spoke just hit you. It's that raw sincerity, man. You can feel when someone's not trying to sell you something. You can feel when they actually care. She'd sit there on camera, this tiny old nun with that big smile and sharp wit, and she'd start talking about things nobody in the mainstream wanted to touch: sin, responsibility, forgiveness, suffering, death, eternity, and somehow it didn't sound preachy. It sounded real, like she was sitting across the table from you saying, hey, I get it, life's hard, but you've got to hold on to something true. That's what made her special. She wasn't scared to talk about pain. She wasn't trying to sugarcoat life. You'd hear her say stuff like, God doesn't make mistakes. If you're suffering, there's a purpose behind it. And people would call in crying or write letters saying her words pulled them back from the edge. Think about that. A woman sitting in a TV studio in Alabama, literally changing lives across the ocean. That's not just communication. That's spiritual energy being transmitted through a screen. And what's really cool is she did it with humor. She was hilarious, man. Like she'd roast people on air. In a loving way, but still savage. If someone called in making excuses for why they weren't practicing their faith, she'd say something like, "You're not too busy to watch television, dear, and just too lazy to pray." And she'd smile right after. People would laugh, but it hit them right where it needed to. That's a gift, being able to correct people with love and still make them laugh. But behind that humor was real wisdom. She saw where the culture was heading, the obsession with self, the emptiness that comes from chasing comfort instead of meaning. And she warned people. Long before social media, long before cancel culture, she was saying, we're becoming a people that worships ourselves. She saw it. She saw how easy it was for humans to drift away from their moral center when they stopped believing in something bigger than themselves. And that's where she went deeper, because her message wasn't be Catholic or else. It was wake up. Remember who you are. She believed every human soul is built for truth, whether you call it God, the creator, or the divine. That's why people from all walks of life listen to her. Muslims, atheists, Protestants, even skeptics. They might not have agreed with everything she said, but they felt her conviction. They respected her honesty. And when she spoke about faith, it wasn't weak or emotional. It was fierce. You could tell this woman had been through storms, spiritual battles, physical pain, loneliness, criticism, and yet she radiated peace. That kind of peace doesn't come from comfort, it comes from surrender. It's like she'd already wrestled with her doubts and come out the other side. It's funny, man, people spend their whole lives chasing influence. They want followers, clout, attention. But Mother Angelica, she had none of that mindset. Her influence came because she didn't chase it. People could tell she was the real deal. She didn't care about trends or image. She cared about truth. And that's what made her impossible to ignore. She'd go on air with no script and say something so direct it would shake you. Stuff like, if you're not living for eternity, you're wasting your time. You can't even argue with that. That kind of line just echoes in your mind. And even if you're someone who's not into religion, it still makes you stop for a second and think, wait, what am I living for? That's what makes her timeless. She didn't just speak to people's minds. She spoke to their conscience. She cut through the noise, through all the distractions, and went straight to that quiet part inside every human being that knows there's more to life than what we see. And the wildest thing, she wasn't trying to be some motivational icon. She was just doing her job, serving God. But that's the paradox, right? The more she forgot about herself, the more impact she had. The less she cared about being famous, the more people remembered her. That's how truth works. It amplifies itself when it's pure. Even people who completely disagreed with her beliefs couldn't deny her presence. That voice, that tone, that passion, it demanded attention. You didn't have to agree with her theology to admire her courage. It's the same reason people still talk about figures like Gandhi, Malcolm X, or Jordan Peterson. They stand for something. They're not afraid of the mob, and they speak like they actually mean it. And the crazy part is, Mother Angelica predicted so much of what we're living through now. The loss of moral direction, the confusion about truth, the rise of emotional fragility. She saw it coming. She said, a nation that forgets God will eventually forget how to love. And look around, man, she wasn't wrong. So when people today rediscover her clips, it hits different. It's not nostalgia. It's revelation. They see this old nun in her habit talking about discipline, love, and accountability, and they realize maybe this is what we've been missing. Maybe this kind of moral clarity is exactly what we need again. Ta-da! And that's why her words still reach beyond religion. They're not about converting people, they're about awakening them. She didn't want you to believe what she believed just to belong. She wanted you to search for truth yourself. Because she knew that when you honestly search, you end up finding God one way or another. So, there's something incredibly haunting about the way some people leave this world. Like their last words, their last ideas, they hit harder because it's like they've crossed some threshold. They see things the rest of us can't yet. Mother Angelica's final reflections before she passed, man, they were deep, unfiltered, and honestly, they shook people. Toward the end of her life, she got quieter, not in spirit, but in words. Her health declined, and she couldn't speak the way she used to. But those who were close to her said her heart got even louder. It's like the closer she got to death, the clearer her vision became. And one of the things she reflected on, and this is the part that caught a lot of people off guard, was the moral state of the West. The culture, politics, the chaos, the emptiness. She saw how people had everything: technology, money, comfort, and yet nobody had peace. Tada, she'd spent her entire life serving her own faith, standing for truth within her church, but she wasn't blind to what was happening beyond it. And in her later reflections, she spoke about how humanity was losing its anchor, how people were confusing freedom with rebellion and progress with decay. That's when she said something that made even her strongest supporters pause. She said that maybe, when everything collapses, the world would have to look somewhere else for moral clarity, somewhere it hasn't been willing to look. And she pointed toward Islam. That's the part that caught people's breath. Not because she was converting, not because she was abandoning what she believed, but because she recognized something profound in another faith. She admired how Muslims, despite all the stereotypes and misunderstandings, still held on to something sacred: daily prayer, discipline, family, modesty, devotion to God. She saw a kind of structure, a kind of spiritual seriousness that reminded her of what Christianity used to be before the West got comfortable. And man, that's a powerful observation. You don't expect a Catholic nun, a global media figure, to make a statement like that. But that's what made her authentic. She wasn't talking like a politician or a theologian trying to score points. She was talking like a woman who had seen the world lose its sense of reverence. And she was honest enough to say, look, they've still got it. Tada, it wasn't about religion versus religion. It was about recognizing where faith still breathes, where people still bow before something greater than themselves, where people still fast, still pray, still raise their kids to believe that morality isn't a social trend, it's a divine command. So now you can imagine how that landed. Some people were stunned, some were angry. Others quietly agreed, because whether you're Christian, Muslim, or atheist, deep down, you can't deny the truth of what she saw. The modern world has lost its spiritual spine. Everything's a brand. Everything's about me, me, me. People are proud of being godless and then wonder why they feel empty. Tada, when she said those words, when she acknowledged Islam's resilience, it wasn't flattery. It was admiration for discipline, for structure, for the refusal to let God become an afterthought. She saw that in Islam, faith still means something practical. It shapes how people live, eat, dress, treat their parents, do business, and see the afterlife. And she respected that. And that's where the real shock came in for people like Joe, who'd always been curious, always exploring ideas, always trying to understand spirituality without the filters of institutions. Imagine hearing a nun, a symbol of Catholic devotion, essentially saying the West might one day have to turn east for its moral compass. That's not a small statement. That's like watching the world's map of truth get redrawn. But she said it because she was free from ego, free from politics, free from fear. When you're that close to eternity, man, you don't care who agrees with you. You just speak what's real. And that's the thing about truth. It's not loyal to labels. It shows up wherever people honor it. Mother Angelica knew that. She wasn't switching sides. She was expanding the conversation. She was saying, stop looking at each other as enemies. Look at where people still remember God, where people still fear losing their souls. That's not a small vision. That's prophetic. And what makes it even more powerful is that she said this not out of despair, but out of hope. She believed that humanity could still turn around, that the collapse of moral systems in the West wasn't the end. It was an opportunity for rebirth. Maybe through humility, maybe through rediscovering what we lost. Maybe through learning from those who still live by divine order. And man, when you sit with that, when you really think about it, it's almost poetic. A woman who spent her entire life inside one tradition ends her journey acknowledging the strength of another. That's not contradiction. That's wisdom. It's like she was saying, truth doesn't belong to us. We belong to truth. Chetza, her words, her courage, they didn't just build a network. They built a bridge between faiths, between generations, between the noise of modern life and the silence of the divine. So yeah, when people heard her final reflections, it wasn't just religious talk. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, the answers aren't in the next app or the next